everybody, and welcome to the Office of Non-Compliance at Dublin Contemporary 2011. My name is Rory, I'm from Spunout.ie. I'd like to say Kid Míle Fáilte to you all. Thank you very, very much for coming from Dublin, from all over Ireland and different places. I know there's going to be different stragglers coming in the next while, so we should fill up nicely. I want you to enjoy yourselves, I want you to take part, challenge us all, challenge Paddy, Earl, I call them when they talk, Kathy, anybody. This, as I said, it's called the Office of Non-Compliance for very good reason. And the schedule here today, you've all been given your polling cards, so there'll be an exit poll carried out after the presidential debate. We're going to kickstart with an interview on people power, essentially, which we'll introduce in a minute. We'll have a break then for a photo shoot with the presidential candidates, those of them that have committed to being here today. We'll hear more about that again in a while. And we'll ask you to stay on for another 5 or 10 minutes after the debate for the exit poll results, which we'll then unleash onto Twitter and hopefully into the media and so on. And we may know what the younger population want from the president, or who they want as the president. We might have some time slippages. We're trying to herd up the candidates as they come in at different times, so please bear with us on that. Housekeeping, you've probably seen the different toilets, fire exits. Catty, fire exits are where? I need to know too. Okay.
He just didn't want to do that, did he?
No, I definitely didn't. Okay, I've been told please keep the room clean. So that's some of the other housekeeping. You can keep your phone on silent, but please do, if any of you are on Twitter or Facebook, we're tweeting from Spunout from @Spunout, and the hashtag is Youth Rising. The event will be live streamed if we can figure out our technical hitches at the moment.
There's a thumb up at the back.
We're okay? We're good to go? Are we live now? Okay, say hello everybody! I don't know where we're sitting. Okay, so if anybody has any questions at any time, find somebody with a Spunout t-shirt and they should have the answer. There's plenty of great volunteers around. To start off, we're just going to have Kathy Scott from Dublin Contemporary at the Office of Non-Compliance to say a few words welcome.
Thanks, Rory. Hi everyone. I'd love to just really take this moment to welcome you all here to the Office of Non-Compliance. And this is what this room is for, essentially. So I'm welcoming you, I guess, on behalf of Dublin Contemporary. This is Ireland's, I guess, biggest large-scale art exhibition ever. This is the main beating heart of the exhibition, this whole building. We also have exhibitions in places like Kew Lane and Dublin High. We've got graffiti work in the National Gallery. So the whole theme of Dublin Contemporary it's called Terrible Beauty, Art, Crisis, Change, and the Office of Non-Compliance. It's a bit of a mouthful, but basically there's 147 artists represented in this building, and every piece of their work, when you scratch the surface, asks us to look closely at the world we live in and the realities that we accept. Some of the work is very provocative, some of it is heartbreaking, some of it is funny. You've seen the Mazer piece outside, so some of it is kind of, really kind of taking a look at authority and bringing the people on the outskirts into the inside. And that's just something I kind of wanted to talk about for a moment. I mean, this very room in the 60s, or this building was the whole of UCD campus, and there was a gentle revolution here in the 60s. So let's hope we can spark a not so gentle revolution here today. I've got tickets, and I've given them to Spunout for everybody here to come back at your own free will over the next 2 weeks and see the show and spend it. There's a lot of free events on here running across the next couple of weeks. I just want to talk for one moment about 2 words that really brought me into a place of non-compliance. And those words, what if? I run a project called the Ireland Icing Project. I don't run it on my own, there's a whole collective of people. But that whole collective of people and that movement between 2 islands beginning with I started with the what if question. So I challenge everybody to kind of think about what if questions rolling around in your head, write them down and start to pursue them. I basically went to Iceland 2.5 years ago after the crash to kind of see what would it look like? What if we got 2 islands beginning with I together, what artists and beatings and salons, what have you connected these two islands to try and bring some change about it? And it's gone from that question, and we've shared with a few people to a bit of a movement now between two countries. So just to dream big and think of those 40 words. What else was I going to say? I looked up the word non-compliance, a failure or a refusal to comply, or a willful disobedience to or disrespect for the authority. So we mean non-compliance in that kind of definition here. I think we need to question all kinds of authorities at the moment and all the structures that we're choosing to live in. So be non-compliant, enjoy your time here, and if there's anything else I can do from the Dublin Contemporary point of view, just fire. Welcome. Enjoy.
Sorry, I just asked Kathy for one more moment to give a slight history to this room that you're in, or the building that you're in.
Yeah, the room in particular, so this gender revolution, people like Kevin Myers, Leila Doolan, a lot of people like in their 60s and 70s now who were in the campus here at UCD. It was the first Catholic university, is that right, Colin? First Catholic university in Ireland. So you can imagine that at that time the students were rebelling and protesting and kind of challenging the status quo. So in this particular room, during the Gender Revolution, apparently it's a little bit like sometimes protests now that are not maybe so organised, so people are maybe not, that clear on what they're protesting about. So in this room there was a huge big stand shouting at each other, and apparently Gareth Fitzgerald is sitting at the back of the room here, and he climbed down over all the tables and came down to kind of try and pull the group together. So you're sitting in a space that is kind of resonant with that kind of non-compliance activity. And that's it, really.
Yeah. And we look forward to seeing you in 50 years when you storm the place.
Or climbing over the tables today.
Yeah, well, it's a non-violent compliance. So I'm going to hand you over to Paddy Duffy here. Paddy Duffy's from County Donegal. He's the founder member of Spunout.ie. He also runs a blog called What Kind of Week It's Been.
Has it been?
Has it been? What kind of week has it been? He writes for the Huffington Post. He's involved with Donegal Youth Council, and he's actually been around the whole youth workspace for about 20 years, even though he's still in his 20s. So figure that out. So I'm going to hand you over to Paddy to introduce the next session. So thanks, Paddy.
Thank you very much indeed, Rory. Yes. And thank you for all of you coming here today. It's brilliant to see you, and I hope you really get something out of it. Now, before I introduce my fantastic guest for the next 45 minutes or so, I just want to say something about today, and I suppose what it is, hopefully, that you'll get out of it. The French have a phrase, l'esprit d'escalier. It literally means staircase wit, but basically the point of it is that you sometimes think of the perfect thing to say as soon as the time has come, that it's pointless to say it anymore. And so the whole thing about this debate, that what separates this debate from all the other ones is that in the others, Ryan Tubridy held sway, or Vincent Brown, or Miriam held sway. Today, you do. So if you have a say, this is your chance to get the politicians, to get the presidential candidates to speak to your issues. So if you have something to say, value your own opinion and be trusting of the fact that people will value yours as well. Make sure to leave it all in the room and don't be regretting it then when you get to the staircase. So now it comes to the next section of the show, and well, some of you who may have seen the Late debate will notice that prior to the presidential campaign, Ryan interviewed Mike Murphy and Jedward, and I think it's safe to say that we can go a little bit better than the guy who used to do Winning Streak and What Happens When You Mix Coke and Orange Skittles. Because today we've got two people who are activists, yes, but they are also just regular human beings like the rest of us. They're not superhuman, they just have something to say, and they say it. Now, they have an awful lot in common. They're both very generous with their time, and particularly today, and we thank them very much for always coming to the aid of Spunout. But they also have something else in common, is that if you go into Eason and O'Connell Street, you will find in the very same section, and this is where it gets really chatty. You have a book out. So Orla is the author of Salty Baby, and Orla is a writer, and a journalist and a regular media presence and a fearsome campaigner for health rights and specifically people who are living with cystic fibrosis. And Colin is the current director of Amnesty International. He's also the founder member of 1&4, which helps people surviving with sexual abuse. And he also sued the Pope at one stage, which I understand is a bit difficult. So, without any further ado, please put your hands together, then take them apart, then put them back together again for Orla Tinsley and Colin McGorman. Orla, I'll start with you. I mean, can you remember a time in your life where a switch went on in your head and said, you know what, this is wrong and I want to say something about it?
Well, for the CF campaigning that I've been doing for the past 6 years, a big thing for me was when I moved from Children's Hospital in Temple Street to Adult Hospital in Vincent's, and there was a report that had just come out by a doctor in the UK, Dr. Ronnie Pollock, and it said that the level of care for CF patients in Ireland was at an emergency level. It was so bad, and he advised how to fix this, and basically that was February 2005, and no one took that recommendation on, even though it actually had been paid for by the CF Association of Ireland, so it kind of had come from Ireland, for Ireland, but no one took it on. And I moved over 2 months later to the adult services, and I saw them myself, and I became really good friends with a girl who was in the same room as me who had CF, and she died within 4 weeks of us being there, and in a room with 5 other people with cross-infection and lots of dangerous components, and it was baffling that would happen. In 2005 we had so much money, and in Northern Ireland, in the UK and in the US, people were living longer with CF, and there was no system in Ireland for people with CF.
And was it a light switch moment for you, or was it a case that something was brewing? Because obviously you've lived your whole life with this, so was it a case that it was it built up over time, or was there a spark?
I suppose as a kid having, you have an illness, so you always kind of have to be vocal in different ways with it from a very young age, because there's doctors and people a lot older than you telling you, I'm going to stick this needle in you now, or I'm going to do this or whatever. And I had to develop maybe naturally had it anyway. I had to just kind of say, well, look, you can do this, you can't do that, and you kind of have to stand up for yourself. But I think with the campaigning, it wasn't really I'm going to be a campaigner, I'm going to be an activist. It was, I don't really want to die in this hospital, and there are things that could be provided by the government that would make my life longer and make so many other people's lives longer. And how can you argue with that? Of course, if you're in a position to do something, then you should just do it. It's not really about I think anybody who was in that situation, who saw what was happening would feel, I would hope, the urgency to do something,
Colin, apart from all the things that you've done in terms of Amnesty International and 1&4, and you've also helped set up an Educate Together school in Wexford, you also ran for election a couple of years ago, and you also served briefly for a time. Yeah. And so I wonder, because something that seemed to happen earlier on in the general election campaign was that everyone was coming up with an opinion, and it always seemed to be, well, if you have an opinion, why don't you run for something? So having had both those experiences, how do you feel about the way that people get involved?
I suppose I have strong feelings about the ways in which either people don't get involved or don't feel able to, as opposed to the way that people do. I mean, when I decided to get involved directly in politics, it was out of a frustration that more people who came from the social justice or activist, for want of a better word, sector didn't get involved. I was concerned that politics, which after all is meant to be about change, didn't seem to be about anything that looked anything like change, and that those who talked about change talked about it from one side of that line. And I remember having lots of conversations with people who worked in the not-for-profit and NGO sector and the social justice sector, asking them why they didn't. And there was something about being on the side of the angels that lots of people understandably wanted to stick with, but there was also a sense that it was soul-destroying, it was life-destroying. There's no point. What would it be like? And the more I heard that, the more I felt driven to try to do something about that. Now, unsuccessfully in lots of ways. There's a million different reasons for that, probably. But I still very much believe that if politics is to change, it has to change from outside of what we understand politics to be. Like, there are people within politics across all of the parties who are passionate about social justice issues, who are passionate about what's right, who are passionate about building a better kind of society, a better kind of future. But unfortunately, there's an awful lot of others who aren't. And the system and how it operates doesn't really, I think, promote that kind of engagement. And quite frankly, I think one of perhaps the bigger failures, and I mean it with a very small f, I don't mean this in judgmental terms, is on our part not to demand better. You know, we keep talking about a lack of leadership in Ireland at the moment. Well, you know, here's the rocket for us all, I suppose. Leadership's not going to come from outside of us, it's got to come from ourselves. And it starts with everybody sitting in this room, it starts with every one of us, it starts with those moments, not only when you realise that something is very wrong, but when, even more importantly, you realise the possibility of it being different, and that it's up to each of us to make it different in small ways, in big ways, you know, in global ways, in local ways, in national ways, but that change in leadership comes from ordinary people.
Did you have one of those sort of spark moments yourself that you said, this is wrong and I want to take this on?
Yeah, but I'd go back further, I suppose. I mean, I think we're all born with an innate sense of connection with other. So we're all, I mean, if you look at very small children particularly, you know, 5 and 6, they're outward looking, they're looking to embrace the world and looking to embrace life. And I've been lucky enough to remember what that was like, because I forgot it for a very, very long time. And for me, that's kind of the light bulb moment. I mean, the nature of being human is to want to engage with the other. Like, we're interested in each other. That's what living means. It's with each other, it's not alone. We'd go, you know, we literally would go insane if we're in isolation. That's one of the consequences of isolation. So our being requires that we be together. So I think that's where it comes from. And then I suppose the light bulb moments that happen that I think drive you to big action are when you see some kind of offence against what that should be like. An offence against love, or against solidarity, or against, you know, our own humanity. And yeah, I remember those moments. Just, I mean, in terms of my work, I suppose, particularly around the whole area of child sexual abuse, it was a moment when and there were lots of little progressive moments. You know, I went back and I reported to the guards in Wexford what had happened to me in February of 1995. And about 7 months, and I thought I was just going back to report what one bad man had done to me, and I didn't realise there was going to be lots of other people he'd done it to as well. I had no sense of the bigger story around all of this. And then realising the bigger story and the levels of knowledge that existed, not just in officialdom, but within society, that had failed to name what they were seeing. And every time I saw one of that, it wasn't that I had a big moment to go, right, I'm going to take... There was a question that obviously we needed to ask, or that I needed to ask. And I think if we find ourselves in a position where there's a question that we need to ask, we have to ask it. I mean, that's our responsibility. That's kind of our duty. It's who we should be, and it's the best of who we can be. So there were lots of those kinds of moments.
I suppose what Colin is saying in a lot of ways is that we don't, you know, we don't really talk a lot to each other, do we? I mean, and we don't really talk about what matters an awful lot either.
It's really interesting because that whole thing of collective, you know, being one together, and we are all the same, and that we should all be helping each other. And you know, it's not about one person standing up and being, you know, the greatest person to do it. Everybody has that power within themselves to do it. You know, it's an innate thing, and it's a dialogue between the people that are supporting and the people who are standing up and doing it. And even like, you know, because we are all the same, and like with campaigning for CF, one of the interesting things that happened in 2008 during the campaign, because we'd get so far and then funding would be pulled for the unit we were trying to build in Vincent's, or you know, support would wane and things would happen. But what happened, interestingly, was on Liveline, they decided to run the CF story, and they were calling the CF story, and people were ringing in and talking about their experiences, and they wanted me to go on and talk on the show, but I didn't want to be the only person talking, and I knew that other people had that urgency in them. And when they started coming out and talking in a way, this common you know, language and movement happened within that community, and it kind of rippled, and in a way that you don't realise that it's rippling. People with other illnesses, people in the health system could see that, you know, when there is injustice, you can do something about it, you know. And I think we all have so much in common, and I think sometimes we forget that, you know, that we have the common connection that we, you know, the connectivity that you're talking about.
From your own personal standpoint, and whenever you look through the book, and even today, it's kind of mortality is always something that is kind of, I suppose, in and around is kind of I mean, not to try and make a mawkish point about it, but I mean, does that alter your philosophy in any way in terms of that this is always sort of looming around, and does it alter the way you think?
I mean, you know, yeah. I mean, when I was 5, the first time I experienced someone who had the same illness as me dying, she was 13, and I think though I didn't really fully comprehend it at that age, and then again at 13 when someone my own age died, I kind of retreated into sort of a lot of Sylvia Plath and all this sort of stuff, you know, which was great. But as I got older, the urgency I thought I had, I realised I really, really did have it. I really did have that urgency to live and to do things. And I think it helps in a way that when you realise that everything is transient and that, you know, you only have one life that you're here with, and you can only do what you can do with, you know, you can't, there's not always apparatus that you can take. You actually just have yourself, and you can only move forward. And as long as you're moving forward and trying to do positive things, and I think that's the most important thing, you know, honesty and truth. It's so cliche, but I think, you know, for campaigning, as long as you're telling the truth and you're being honest about your situation and you're being honest about what you want and you're focused on the real reason that you're doing it, then, you know, you can't go wrong. You can't go wrong. And it might not get there the first time. You might not get there. You know, we've had so many knocks in the past 6 years, but, you know, now the unit that we've been campaigning for is being built. The last time I was in Vincent's, I could see the crane moving on it. You know, that was amazing. And in April, it's going up. And what that did as well was that all around the country, these amazing fundraising initiatives from, you know, parents and members of the public, and it all started in different communities. And the awareness that was being raised, it changed the whole idea of CF in Ireland, but also, you know, the fact, like, I remember one girl, a 13-year-old girl, Facebooked me and said that, you know, I think she'd been listening to me talk about it somewhere, and she'd seen a lot of awareness in a few weeks about it, and she said she went into school and she told her teacher that she wanted to announce to the class that she had cystic fibrosis, and that she wanted them to know, because they were always asking her why was she coughing, and she didn't know how to communicate that, and she wasn't comfortable with it, and she suddenly felt that she was comfortable enough to talk about it. And those little things, you know, just making people aware that we are all the same, you know.
I suppose, Colin, for you, and to make the stand that you had to make, you were doing this in the context of people where people not only didn't speak in general, but they definitely didn't speak about, or certainly, and if they did speak regarding priests, especially, it was always with due deference, and there's this sort of apparatus of sort of, you know, of deference to it. So, I mean, at what point then did you decide to say, no, you know what, I'm going to bring this on and take it from there?
I mean, I'm caught both with a link between that question and something that Orla had said, and it is that the truth changes everything, you know, and, you know, whether you see that change in the moment. I mean, if you speak truth, it changes everything. It changes your understanding, your analysis, the way that you look at the world. It changes the people who receive that truth in some form. We might not see it. We might not see it for generations. We might never see it, but it changes everything. There wasn't, like, there wasn't a moment, again, where I said, I've kind of lost your question a little bit, but there wasn't a moment where I said that...
It's basically, it's a case of speaking up, and then, but you're doing this in a field where...
I think it's the why you do it, again, back to something Ola said. Know why you're going to do something, and stay grounded in why you're going to do it. Be clear about what your motivation is. I mean, everybody who's in this room is here for a reason today. Like, you're here because you care about something. Something brought you into this place. You know, and as you leave this place and as you go out around, know what it is that has you doing what you're doing and why you're doing it, and stay connected to that, and you won't get it wrong. I mean, the question of mortality is interesting. It's become terribly fashionable to quote Steve Jobs at the moment, I know. But I remember hearing his commencement lecture that he gave just after he'd been diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, and he said there was a moment in his life when at 17 he connected with the notion of mortality, and he decided that every morning he'd look in the mirror and he'd think, if this was, the last day? Would I be happy doing what I'm doing? And if too many days in a row it wasn't, then he realised that something needed to change. There is something about being able to understand and value, whether it's to a realisation that it won't always be the case, or whether it's just because, God, it's such an exciting experience, being alive and the possibility of being alive, and then just running with that and knowing what it is that you want to do. Knowing, getting the best you possibly can out of it in every moment. And having that, and having a sense of that, then demands that when those big, if they come along, challenges come along that require you to stand up and speak a truth that might otherwise be difficult, actually you're not really frightened to do it. I was never frightened. I don't know, in terms of speaking out. No. I never felt frightened about speaking out because
it was right.
The truth demanded it. Yeah. It was what was absolutely required. I would have been more frightened, frankly, of not doing it because of what that would have done to me, if you know what I mean. I was really interested, to ask you why you do what you do, because it's not about you. I mean, I see that coming out of you every time I see you speak. It's not about you. So what's it about? Sorry, Paddy.
It's just about, in the beginning when I started, I couldn't not do it. I could not say, this was such an injustice, and it was so obvious, and I didn't understand. It actually really upset and confused me that no one else around me could see it, but people could see it in different ways. But there was a lot of fear, and for some reason, I didn't have that fear. I just had the idea, the feeling that I had to do it, and that's why, the thing about it is, I didn't think it would take 6 years. I didn't think it would take that long, but it did, and you just have to keep going with it and stay focused on it, and that's it. And the honesty is, as long as you're telling the truth, you can't go wrong.
In terms of then, I suppose I would like, because everybody, like you say, Colin, is here for a reason. They all probably come from a place of having worked on a project or want to work on a project, and maybe they're just trying to think of, how do we, peel back the first bit of it and then get it going from there. And so, I mean, from all the sort of the battles that you've fought, I mean, do you have any, I suppose, advice in terms of dealing with people who are willfully out to obfuscate you, to try and put you off course, to try and diminish what it is you're trying to do?
Yeah, don't let them. Seriously, just don't. If you know what's right, stay grounded and you know what's right, and keep going. And if somebody closes a door, if somebody prevents you, do it again, do it more. We had a situation recently in Amnesty. Some of you may be aware of the case of Troy Davis, a man in Atlanta in Georgia, who was unfortunately executed about 2 weeks ago. And it was a case that we'd been working on in Ireland here for the last sort of 10 or 15 years. It's spent 22 years on death row. And some of my colleagues in particular had been very personally involved in working on his case. And I remember over the years thinking, if it gets to the point where we're getting close to midnight and he's due to be executed, how are we going to get through this? How am I going to be able to help people get through this? Now, I should have known better, because the one thing that one of my colleagues, when I was having this conversation with her, who had been so closely involved, said, we just have to do more. So if you come up against, if you know what's right, if you believe in it, take care of yourself in it above all else. Don't become a victim of, a broader injustice or refusal to acknowledge what's right. So take care of yourself. Sustain yourself so that you're able to keep going in it and be sensible about it. But if you come up against that and you meet blind ignorance or willful refusal or cowardice or dishonesty or corruption, do more. Keep going. Because it will change. I mean, it's inevitable. Change is inevitable. And the spirit of what's coming out of this room, and the spirit that's what's coming out of an awful lot of places in Ireland at the moment. I mean, if you could please just, as we develop the hashtag a little bit, maybe come up with other ones that's rising, that's less the rest of us who are not so useful joining this, then maybe something really profound will happen in this country. Maybe something and I think it's now inevitable, because so much of what prevented change here has broken down. The big old institutions, the big old establishment, and I don't mean that in a pejorative sense, because it's easy to judge and attack. They grew out of this society. They are a product of what has come before, as now, frankly, are we, all of us. But they have broken down. There's nothing left but us. So whatever comes from this place now will be an expression of who we are.
Yeah.
So the opportunity for us is to recognise that, and then either to decide to shape that. And by the way, we'll shape it by choosing not to get involved and not demanding and determining what our future looks like. And that, by the way, is not passive, that's active. That's a decision and a refusal not to engage, and that has a direct consequence. Or we can engage and work to affect change and build the kind of society that we want to be, and then it will be something truly extraordinary, I think. You know, we have that capacity.
Is that a self-conscious thing, Colin, or is it something that's more natural? I mean, is it something that you can think about, or is it something you can plan, or do you just have to go with your gut in these things?
I think you have to. It's about the conversation. You know, we talked before we came in here. It's about this conversation.
It's about the dialogue. You know, because it is a dialogue that we haven't had before. You know, this sort of, it's a freedom to have this dialogue, and so many people who previously wouldn't have thought about questioning or challenging, they now feel that they're in a position. You know, when the structure is collapsed, that they can stand up and they can have these conversations, and that's what's important, and that's what will get everybody through this together. You know, because each person is important, and each person's opinion is important, and that's what it is. You know, and moving forward like that, and not staying stuck in this, and realizing that we have a real opportunity to make something happen. And you know, it will happen organically anyway. It will happen. It's just about choosing to be part of that. Really, it is happening. I mean, this is a moment of change. You know, for me personally, walking into this room and in this conversation, I'm changed by this conversation, and I mean that in quite. This has been quite a moment for me, the conversations that we had earlier on and this one here. So I'm changed by this. So the rising, or the youth rising, has happened. And if, you know, one person leave this room having decided that that's going to happen, then it happens. If 10% of the room does, if 10% of the people who might be watching online do, if we all do, then it's happening. We're in the middle of it. It's happening right now.
Orla, do you find, I mean, whenever you're, you know, talking about, and it's almost, like you say, it's been 6 years of constant battle, I suppose. Do you ever get tired of it? Or I mean, do you get strength from the fight? Or I mean, are there some times where you just want to throw your hands up and say, I don't know why I'm doing this?
There's definitely been times when I've been tired of it. Absolutely, yeah. You know, that's human. I'm more so frustrated at the situation and not fully understanding myself why it's taking so long when it's such a simple, you know, we need single ensuite rooms to live, we don't get them, we die. It's very simple, you know what I mean? And people are getting them in the UK and Northern Ireland, and it's something that, you know, and we had so much money to do it, and it wasn't done. And then, you know, there was a situation where we had gathered the funding together and that was refused. Yeah. So it's very strange.
How do you maintain pragmatism? How do you maintain your cool at all when you say stuff like that, and there are people who are trying to, you know, mitigate their circumstances and are trying to get out of it and trying to, you know, make all sorts of excuses? I mean, like, how do you manage to keep your jets cool in a situation like that?
I just think that anger is important, but you know, you have to channel it in the right way. You can't just go out and you can't just scream at someone because you're angry at them or because something is frustrating you. You know, I think the most important thing is to channel it in a positive way, and that's the only way to do it, really. You know what I mean? You know, I think it's because I know the truth, and I see it, and I know that it has to happen. You know, and that it had to happen for us, and that each moment is a new moment, and you know, it's refreshing to know that you can take on that, you know, and just go with it, because when you know, like, the truth, you can't really deny that, you know.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think anger is a really important motivation, but anger not in a destructive way. You know, anger that really is about outrage, that is a demand and a push to action. I mean, you know, we need to get to the point where we have greater respect for that. You know, too often here we've been taught, and I mean, it's not true just for Ireland. It's true, I think, right across human societies. We're told that we should be nice, and somehow that anger isn't nice. Well, I tell you what, there's nothing nicer or more positive or more affirming or more loving than a sense of outrage when you hear what Orla's talking about, you know, which is so preventable, which is something that we could do something about, and refusing to be silent in the face of that. I mean, that's an absolute demand. I do think as well, though, it is important, and that's why I talked about that need to sustain oneself, that actually there is something very important in a moment where you kind of think, I really just can't do this anymore. You know, when you're talking out in the world and it feels like nobody wants to listen, and you can be exhausted, it has an impact on you. So there are those moments that cause you to reflect on the possibility of not doing this anymore because it's become too self-destructive or too destructive generally.
But that's so incredible.
Or because it's so difficult. But then there's a fantastic moment in that again where you again decide, no, I'm going to keep going. So you make a very active decision to do it again. It's to constantly check.
But that's what's so pure about it, because you have to. That awareness is what makes you able to do that. Because if you weren't getting to the place where you were tired and you were run down and you were observing yourself in the situation, then you'd be in trouble.
Or where you're under attack, you know, or where you become under attack, because it's not all nice. It can be very negative. I mean, we have to be careful not to turn ourselves into, you know, victims in media terms as well, so that, you know, we can take on a different battle. But sometimes the kind of attack that can come can be vicious, can be unkind, can be.
How do you deal with that pressure? I mean, not even the pressure of people, you know, kind of slamming you, but also that pressure of people that, well, you know, people look to you both. You know, it's kind of when TV or radio producers are looking for somebody to talk about, you know, health issues, or they're looking to talk about rights issues, they look to you. And do you find that that's something that, you know, is that something that you struggle with, or is it something that you
I'm really
find a burden?
No, I'm really glad that they do. I think it's important that they do, and it's really important that we all engage in those conversations when they happen. You need to be clear about, and again, you said some interesting stuff about this earlier on, about the choices that you have to make. Yeah. Is this an opportunity or a moment to advance the conversation? Or am I fulfilling some empty agenda where the discussion is going to be very cliched, very black and white, and very meaningless, because there isn't a depth of analysis or thought that needs to go into it? So it's not about talking or engaging or, you know, standing in front of a camera because the camera's there. You know, it's not about
that's
performance,
the thing. I mean,
it's about the possibility.
With the campaigning that we've been doing the last few years, there's been incredible support from people with CF and from the public, and sometimes there's been people who've gone out on their own, and that's important too. But they would go out in a different angle with things, and they talk about, you know, because it's important to show the positive and the negative. You can't just be positive all the time. This is one of the biggest problems I find, particularly with chronic illness. People think, you know, that you need, you know, they kind of put you in a situation where you're an inspiration and you know, you give them energy and that's fine. But it's okay to be negative as well. And even in campaigning, that's true too. You know, but sometimes, you know, I found like a few years ago, it kind of went off in the wrong direction, and there was all this coverage that didn't need to be there. It wasn't serving any purpose to the cause, and it was hurting it more so. And people were calling me going, why are they still talking about this? Why are they running, you know, this? I thought you sorted this out. And it's a funny thing, and you kind of go, actually, you have to know that you've no control over it, but you also have to, as long as you just check with yourself, am I doing the best I can do? Am I being honest in my situation? Because you can't control what other people are going to do, and once it's out in the media and you're you know, that's just going to go the way it is. But you just have to constantly check yourself.
I'm just going to say that we've got a couple more minutes amongst ourselves, but then we're going to go amongst you into the audience.
Not all of us. We're not going out there, actually.
And yeah, not so much of the crowd surfing, especially not with the microphones. But yeah, I mean, so if you have any questions for Colm and Orla, you know, just be thinking about them in the next few minutes, and we'll get about 10 or 15 minutes to do that. But I suppose just then, so before we throw it to the audience, guys, I just mentioned there about the fact that, you know, people look to you for, you know, for inspiration or for, you know, information or whatever it is. But who do you look to, Colm?
Others. And I mean, not necessarily figures, and that's one of the things that I think where we need to get to. It's one of the things why I think, you know, this presidential election is horrifying, interesting, intriguing, and even in moments, thankfully, inspiring. Not enough of those possibly, because I don't know that we allow it to be all that it could be. You know, one of the things I worry sometimes about how we create pedestals or people that we want to put on pedestals, then it's not, because I think real inspiration comes from recognizing the possibility of who we can be as individuals by seeing somebody else do something that we connect with, both as a possibility and a reality. This is how we can be, as opposed to, aren't they fabulous? I could never be that. You know, that kind of stuff. And we've done too much of that here. We look to other people all the time.
That's what creates the impossibility.
Yeah, either in very negative ways or in very, it would appear, positive ways that are about disowning our responsibility for who we are and for the responsibilities that we have to each other. So the inspiring people that I meet very often are, well, Orla's really inspired me today, but I mean, our conversation has as well. That's the fact that you're all here. I'm inspired by the fact that we're having this conversation. Yesterday I met an amazing man called Mohammed Mustafiani, who's an Iranian lawyer. Some of you might be familiar with the case of Sakina Ashtiani, who was a woman in Iran who was sentenced to death by stoning for adultery. And he was her lawyer. He's an Iranian lawyer who defends or has defended lots of people who've been sentenced to death over there. The consequence of that was that himself and his family came under direct threat and experienced imprisonment and arbitrary detention and lots of other really negative stuff there, and he's now in exile in Norway. And he was in with us yesterday, and I was just with colleagues in Amnesty thanking him for what he does. And he said, well, it's my duty to do what I do. And I was saying, yes, but that's why I genuinely felt this huge level of gratitude that this man exists in the world and does what he does. And he inspires me. Yeah. But then, my kids inspire me every day. The people that I meet inspire me. Living inspires me. And I think that's what we have to look for, to find in ourselves. And again, that's another way in which we realise our own transformative power and potential in small ways, in big ways, in universal ways.
And Orla, just before we go to the audience, is there anyone that you look to in particular?
I sound like I'm giving the same answer here, but I honestly, everybody, you know what I mean, everybody. And what's so interesting is that, people are going through so many different experiences in their lives and so many different struggles and, triumphs, and everybody deals with things in a different way, and yet we're all the same. So it's just, I love, my friends inspire me, my parents inspire me, Colin inspires me, like that. But seriously, and it's incredible just to see, it's just life, and that's what it is. That's what all of it is about. It's just life. We're all the same. We're just people, and we can all just do the best that we can do. That's it.
Excellent. An inspirational dual carriageway to finish off. So then, if anybody has any questions within the floor, and it will take them for the next 10 or so minutes. If any of you have anything, we've got a gentleman down here.
Sorry, my question is just for Mr. O'Gorman. First of all, can I just say that you're a man I admire very much, and I followed you through the whole Troy Davis team on Twitter, and it just constantly made me more aware of what was happening in that country. But my question is, how can young people in Ireland get involved about a cause abroad? For instance, I've seen that there was 20 doctors in Iran who studied in the Royal College of Surgeons.
In Bahrain.
In Bahrain, sorry, who were arrested. And I thought this was disgusting and it was outrageous, and I didn't really know what I could do about it.
You'll excuse me now, and this isn't meant to be a blatant plug, but join Amnesty if you're not already a member.
Yeah.
And when I say, you don't necessarily have to, when I say join, I mean get involved in the work. If you can join as a member, fantastic. Lend your voice, because it is the power of the collective voice that's the only true power in the world, whether it's at the national or the international level. But do something about it. Clicking on a link might seem like a pretty empty thing to do, but it's, in our experience, Amnesty is 50 years old now, the only thing that ultimately leads to freedom for prisoners of conscience.